About 1 billion years or so ago, when time was young, molten rock spewed upward. They crystallized, and in so doing, formed the most unusual and useful mineral fiber known to man.
The green shimmer of a fresh-picked sample indicates the richness of this magic mineral.
For decades, Canadians have known how dangerous asbestos can be, that it can cause severe respiratory problems.
At the moment, we're sort of keeping score. We're ticking off people as they die.
Asbestos is a hazardous material. Exposure to it can harm your health. But there are ways to prevent that. And you should be aware of what those ways are. The leading cause of workplace disease and death in BC for the last several years, and for many years, has been asbestos exposure. That means between 40 and maybe 70 workers have died unnecessarily every year over the last few years. We just can't let that continue. And it's completely preventable. We can prevent this entirely. So, there's a huge ethical issue here. We can't just say, oh, the numbers aren't that big. We don't need to worry about them. Not when we can stop it. We have the tools in place to stop it right now. It's not a drama, it's not a science fiction film or anything that we're putting on here. It's real life. It's things that are really happening and out there and things that you can really do to prevent it. So the more material we can get out there about asbestos so people are aware of the hazards and what they can do and what they can't do, that's what we need to do. It's the right thing to do. You'd be surprised at how widespread asbestos use has been since the Industrial Revolution. They had engines, they had boilers, they had, steam, pipes, and everything else like that. All of that stuff has to be insulated with something because otherwise the heat escapes. So they would wrap all the pipes and all the boilers and everything with asbestos insulation. So everything having to do with fire was connected to asbestos. And that's when the asbestos mines in Canada opened up, was during that time, the late 1870s. And of course, moving forward, they found out that the fibers don't break down and they help hold things together. So we add a little asbestos to flooring and we can hold the flooring together. We add it to plaster, we can hold the plaster together. Around Christmas time, they had all that white stuff, fake snow, and well, back in the 50s, it was more than likely asbestos. So you'd bring it into your house and sprinkle it all over the place and put it on your Christmas trees, and you'd buy it in boxes. It would say asbestos. No one was trying to hide anything. They were really trying to promote this, and the asbestos industry was making scads of money. Asbestos is gold, basically. It's just white gold. So they put it in everything. One of the best kept secrets of the industry was that this stuff was killing people who were directly involved with handling it. Even though in the 1930s, there's definite concern amongst the medical professionals that they could put two and two together, but they didn't know very much about how it was happening and what was causing it. It wasn't until Irving Selikoff applied the scientific method. So you have a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis experimentally, you do statistics, and then you publish it all in peer-reviewed medical journals. He said, people are getting asbestos disease from inhaling fibers, and they're getting it from inhaling this many fibers. And this is how long it's taking to develop disease. He put it all together and blew the top off of the big secrecy that was going on in the industry. When this information came in from Selikoff, the questions started to be asked, how do we protect these people? That led to all the regulations in the late 70s that popped up, and the asbestos products started to be banned. Exposure limits came into play, and so the regulations started coming into play. And we suddenly had, oh, this stuff is terrible. We have to protect these people. We have to have respirators. We have to have protective clothing. We have to have procedures to protect people who are outside of these areas. And we have to dispose of this stuff properly. Asbestos is a fibrous mineral. And when you disturb it, these fibers get airborne. So when you're talking about asbestos diseases, the exposure is generally through inhalation of airborne fibers, which means you're looking at some form of lung disease. One of the earliest forms of the lung disease that we saw was something called asbestosis, which was a scarring of the lungs. This physically makes it difficult to breathe. And that happened early on in most cases because of the extremely high asbestos exposures. Most of these people died before cancer even developed. So now what we see are these longer latency diseases, regular lung cancer, which is of the lung tissue itself, and another cancer called mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lungs and the lining of the internal organs. And they get embedded in these other places and can cause these long-term cancers, which might take 30 or 40 or 45 years to manifest. So a young worker who is exposed in his or her 20s today, they'll be retired or close to retirement in their 60s, looking forward to looking after their grandchildren. And then this will strike them as a consequence of what they were exposed to early on. At some point, a threshold will be reached that's a trigger. And unfortunately, as with a lot of cancers, we don't know where that trigger is with individuals. The current exposure limit in BC is 0.1 fibers per mil. Now, a mil is a cubic centimeter, so it's about that big. And it's a tenth of a fiber, tenth of an asbestos fiber in there. It is a very, very low exposure limit. As far as regulations are concerned, in most places in the world, the concentration of asbestos in a product so that it's considered an asbestos-containing product and all the regulations apply is anywhere between 0.1% and 1%. Research has been done that shows that if you don't take precautions, even if you have a fraction of a percentage, like a tenth of a percent of asbestos in vermiculite, that can turn into 100 times the exposure limit for workers who are working around it. They have a term in the industry called friable that you also see in the regulation, which means it can be crumbled in the hand. And if you're playing with that sort of stuff, your risk level is going to be a lot higher. It's amazing how loose this stuff is and how the asbestos can get out into the air and get distributed. In terms of asbestos, it's not just the percentage that you're looking at. You're looking at how much are you going to be disturbing and how are you going to be disturbing it. You got a couple of guys running around going after drywall with crowbars and absolutely no precautions. I've seen it. They're just covered with white stuff. And that can lead to some real severe consequences for people. This is something that has to stop. We need to carry on pushing the asbestos button as hard as we can because we can. We can do it and we can prevent these things from happening. We can prevent these diseases. First thing you should do, starting work in a house or whatever, in a building, and you suspect there might be asbestos present, is to do a survey. The contractor or the consultant or whoever goes in, they collect the samples of all the material that might be impacted by the work that's going to be done. And they go to a lab, and you get a lab report back, which is the lab analysis report, which will list the samples that were taken, and it'll have some other information where they were taken, what the materials are, whether or not asbestos is present, and what the percentage of asbestos is in there. Now that report will go to the consultant who is preparing the survey report. The survey report is probably one of the most important reports you can get, which lists the samples that were collected, what the results are, and how that impacts the rest of the house. So if, for example, you go into the house and you take 3 samples of drywall and it's asbestos, the mud, you make an assumption that it all is. And so you would have to include in the survey report, this is how much material would have to be removed as asbestos. This much drywall, this much flooring, this much ceiling texture, or whatever it has to be. That comes out in that report. And that shows where all the asbestos is and where all the quantities are. The contractor will use that report to generate an estimate and, a scope of the work and be able to give timelines and everything else to the homeowner so that they will know how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, and how long they're going to be out of the house, if that's the case. So that report is going to be used by contractors to prepare all the other contract documentation that they have to prepare in order to get the job done. It's all in the planning, and if you misidentify something as non-asbestos that contains asbestos, that cascades down through the whole operation, and a lot of people can be exposed and at risk as a consequence of that. So you really have to know what you're doing. If the work is not done properly before the unprotected people get in there, the list of people potentially exposed is quite long. First off, the homeowner and their family. And then you hire a contractor, say a remediation contractor, to come in to give you an estimate. So they might be exposed. And then you're dealing with the contractor. Well, if the contractor doesn't know that there's asbestos there, then all the contractor's workers could be exposed. When the job is done, if things haven't been done properly, what about the municipal inspectors? Last but definitely not least, the regulators, health and safety officers who go in and do an inspection are going to be exposed if they don't know what's going on. So if the work isn't done to identify the asbestos and have it removed properly, then you have a cascading reaction with a lot of people who could potentially be exposed. So that's the key. You have to figure out, is asbestos there or not, and everything sort of works from there. Once you confirm that asbestos is present in the building, the occupational health and safety regulation kicks in, and they have a lot of stuff in there that's fairly prescriptive in terms of what you need to do to get the job done properly and legally. The first thing you have to look at is decide what is the level of risk you're looking at. And the regulation describes low, moderate, and high risk. Low risk is basically no exposure whatsoever. You're not disturbing the asbestos fibers at all. You can work next to the wall. If you're not going to bump into it or anything else like that, you can do your work. High risk at the other end is you're building a bubble. The potential fiber release is so serious that you have to contain everything. The floor is sealed, the walls are sealed, it's airtight. You're evacuating air out of it, so the pressure inside is less than outside. And if there's a rip in the wall, in that case, then the air will rush in rather than rushing out. All of that air has to be evacuated through a HEPA filter cabinet, and HEPA is high efficiency particulate air, and it'll take out 99.97% of particulate. And then you have to have a number of rooms within this enclosure, what they call a clean room, before you actually enter it. When they come out after they work, they have to shower off. Then there will be a waste transfer area in there as well. The personal protective equipment requirements are much higher. There are a lot of bells and whistles associated. Now, everything in between is what we call moderate risk. And basically anything from a plumber wearing a half-face respirator and cutting a small hole in a wall to a significant amount of drywall removal can be done technically moderate risk. You don't have to build a bubble, but depending upon the work that you do, you might have to do dust control. You might have to use different kinds of respiratory protection. And all that has to be decided based upon the asbestos sampling results and the extent of the material that you're going to be disturbing or removing. WorkSafe BC publishes a Safe Work Practices for Handling Asbestos book. And this thing just didn't appear out of the ether. This thing started way back in the 80s or the 90s and has graduated and changed over the years. And when I joined the board, I've rewritten it several times, adding in new information that we've learned as the industry has progressed and as the regulations have changed. So that book is basically a Bible for how to do asbestos removal in British Columbia. It covers our regulation. It talks about how you manage a project. It talks about the kinds of things you need to do for a survey, how many samples you need to collect, how much you need to collect. It talks about the different types of asbestos risk and the types of enclosures and personal protective equipment that you need to wear. There's even a section in there specifically for people doing demolition work, what to watch out and be careful of so that you don't inadvertently expose yourself or anybody else. All the requirements are in there as well. So anybody who's phoned me and said, I'd sort of like to go in the asbestos business, and I've had a few calls like that, and I've said, the first thing you need to do is read that book. You'll get a really good idea of what you need to do, and then you can make a decision as to whether or not you want to go into that business. And then give me a call back and ask the questions that you're going to have. The big piece of protection is the respirator. We're talking respirators like this. We're not talking disposable N95 type things, which we saw all over the place during the pandemic. So this is elastomeric, which means it's a rubbery compound, and it fits over the lower half of the face and it fastens behind the head. And it seals to the face. There's a seal on the inside of it. And it has cartridges. Now these cartridges screw on. These ones, purple ones, and the color is easy to tell what they do, are the HEPA filters. So when a worker puts this on and breathes in, the air goes in there and out the exhalation valve in the bottom, and it will filter out 99.97% of the asbestos fibers coming through there. And you don't need to dispose of these. These are reusable. So when you come out of the work area, you wash off your respirator as well as your hands and everything else if you're doing a moderate risk job. And store it properly and it'll last you for years. These things are all rated in terms of protection. So these ones, this particular half-face respirator, will protect you to a factor of 10. So if the exposure limit is 0.1 and the fiber count is going to be, you can estimate it somewhere going to be between 0.1 and 1, then you can wear this. You're perfectly safe with this on. If you're doing high-risk work, you're generally not going to be able to use a half-face respirator. You're going to have to go to something which covers the entire face and seals around the entire face. It's much more protective. So instead of having a protection factor of 10 like the half-face respirator, this one has a personal protective factor of about 100. But it has the same cartridges on it. It's a HEPA filter cartridge. This one also has a cable which attaches to a battery, and that battery will blow cool air into the mask. And it seals much nicer to the face than, say, a half-face respirator will. And again, you're going to want that extra protection if you're dealing with an atmosphere that has a fair amount of asbestos fiber floating around in it. Cost-wise, these are obviously much, much more expensive than these. So it's another reason why you want to determine the risk of the job before you actually get in and start doing the work. Any kind of respirator that you use for asbestos removal has to be properly fit tested. They come in a variety of sizes. So you find one that fits your face properly, and then you do a test. One of the ones, for example, is called an irritant smoke test, which I like because you can't fake not detecting it. And if you have the mask on and it's sealed properly, you're not going to smell the smoke and you're not going to react to it. And if it's not fitted properly, it's not going to provide the protection that it needs to provide. And the fit test is required by regulation. Once a year, you have to be fit tested. Respiratory protection is the key. Asbestos is mainly a lung disease. So you want to make sure that your lungs are protected and there is equipment that can do that. You've got to take your precautions and realize what your hazards are, and the equipment and everything else is available to do the work properly. There is no excuse for not using it. None at all. If you work with asbestos, you have to wear personal protective equipment. And that consists of a asbestos-proof suit. So the material has got to be such that it's resistant to asbestos fibers, and these all are. The ones that are sold properly are. You don't want to have a painter's suit. I mean, if you can see your clothes through it, it's not the right suit. So it has to be something that's going to be fairly opaque. And they have a hood on them with an elastic, and you may have elastic on the sleeves and on the ankles. And some of them even have boots attached, which is nice. And it will keep the asbestos fibers off your clothes or off your body, depending upon whether you're wearing any clothes under the suit or not. And if you're doing high-risk work and you're going through a shower, you're not wearing any clothes under these things. For moderate risk work, you'll wear clothes underneath these things, so you want to make sure you're not getting asbestos fibers on your clothes. With these suits, you'll often see the contractors duct taping wrists and ankles. It'll certainly stop any asbestos fibers from getting in under the edge of the suit. But it also helps keep the suit in one place because it's a single piece garment, and if you're bending over and stuff like that, the legs will ride up, the arms will ride up, and it'll prevent that from happening. Especially in high-risk work, it's important to wear the right size. Better to go big than too small on these things. In some asbestos work that we call high-risk work, you have to literally build a bubble. You've got to build a seal exposing only the areas that you're going to tackle with regards to asbestos removal. That means you have to have polyplastic on the floor, and you have to have plastic up the walls to the edge of the ceiling. So everything that you don't want to have impacted by asbestos fibers or debris or anything else, you got to seal. And then, of course, you put that under what we call negative pressure, which means the pressure is lower inside than outside, and it'll be sucking air out against that poly. So if there's any problem with the enclosure, the air's not going to leak out. It'll leak into the enclosure. And that's really important, especially if other people are working around the area at the same time. If you have a house and you're going to do high-risk removal of the whole house, you can just turn the whole house into a bubble. Building the bubble can be time-consuming. I mean, half the job might be building the enclosure, and the other half the job is taking the asbestos out. You really have to build those enclosures carefully so there's absolutely no chance of anything getting out. In a high-risk type asbestos job, there's only one entrance that the workers are going in and out of. When they come out, they're going to be contaminated in some capacity. When they're ready to come back into the work area, they take the suits off and dispose of them, and then they move into a shower. And they actually shower with their respirator on. So you have to be careful not to get water in the cartridges. And then they'll move into a clean room, which is the change room. So the theory is that they're clean coming out by the time they come out the shower, and they're not bringing contamination with them. You have to do air monitoring in the clean room as part of the regulation for a high-risk job to make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to do. You can't fool the asbestos sampling. Of course, you have a shower, that means that complicates things. You have to have water, and the water has to be tempered. And you also have to deal with the water, right? Because the water technically has asbestos in it. So these are all complications with the contractor has to think about. It's not easy to do the job properly. One of the industries that's sort of been sliding under the radar all this time is residential. And that's why WorkSafe has been concentrating on putting a lot of effort into dealing with homeowners and homeowner renovations. So the message is getting out there that they're aware that there could be asbestos in their houses that has to be dealt with. But you can't just sit on the knowledge and do nothing about it. You have to act on it and apply that to your own home repairs. Let's think of the average house. So the outside of the house might have asbestos cement siding or asbestos-containing stucco. The rainwater leaders and pipes, the pipes that go up and down, are probably asbestos cement, asbestos shingles, or asbestos shakes on the roof, perhaps. The cement and the mortar in the bricks in the chimney could contain asbestos. Okay, that's just outside. Now we go inside. And all your building finishes, your drywall mud could contain asbestos, your flooring, insulation on any pipes that you have in the house. That furnace duct tape is often asbestos tape. You could have asbestos cement board behind ovens. A lot of the attic insulation is vermiculite attic insulation. A lot of homeowners have asked me, why can't I do this work myself? I've got some carpentry experience, I know how to lay a floor, I can change a faucet. Why can't I just take this asbestos out on my own? Well, for one thing, if you make a mistake, that mistake can be catastrophic exposure to you and your family. And there have been mistakes made from homeowners doing their own work. One of the main issues with homeowners doing their own work is not only the exposure piece, but it's also the waste disposal piece. Because they don't have a waste disposal chain like a lot of the contractors do, where, okay, we have the waste manifest forms, we have a truck, we take it down to the site and dump it properly. The homeowner doesn't have that. So they'll take the asbestos, they'll walk it across the carport and dump it in the dumpster. The best advice I can give to a homeowner who wants to do asbestos removal themselves is don't. Get someone who knows what they're doing. Believe me, it's going to save you a lot of grief in the long run. Homeowners and many other building owners have this habit of thinking that if they hire a contractor, they just completely absolve themselves of any kind of ethics or litigation or anything like that. And that's not true. If we look at it, say, a typical home renovation, the person who's ultimately responsible is the homeowner. The homeowner is responsible for hiring somebody who is knowledgeable, who is licensed to do asbestos removal. Make sure your contractor is registered with WorkSafe. That means they have the appropriate insurance and everything else in play for their workers. If you don't do that, you could be responsible for a worker who gets hurt on the site. They could sue you. And one of the things that I've tried to do throughout my career is do what I can to educate these ancillary trades, if you will, so in particular plumbing and electricians, that they're at risk. They come in and they deal with the pipe. They're thinking about the pipe. They're not thinking about the wall they have to cut to get to it. The 10 Steps to Compliance was a form intended for homeowners and people who were sort of being their own project managers, if you will. And they really didn't understand what needed to be done to make sure the work was done properly, but also to make sure that the work these steps are all done so the contractor doesn't miss anything. That's readily available on the WorkSafe BC website, so it's really carefully laid out for homeowners to understand. This is what you need to do to make sure the job is done right, and you're protecting yourself and your investment by following this. An exposure control plan is just that. It's a plan that the contractor comes up with that describes basically how the work is going to be controlled and how the workers are going to be protected, and if necessary, how their health is going to be monitored over the years. This is a requirement of the regulation. A homeowner who hires a contractor can request their exposure control plan. They should at least ask if they have one. Some of them are pretty involved and pretty detailed. Some of them may be a little bit simpler depending upon the kind of asbestos work that they do. They should at least make sure that they get other documentation associated with the job. But the contractor is required to have that exposure control plan, or ECP, on the site anyway. The clearance document is, again, another requirement of the regulation, and essentially is a written document prepared by the contractor that basically states all of the asbestos that was identified in the survey and in the scope of work has been properly removed and disposed of, signed by the contractor. And that document is something that the homeowner should definitely ask for because it's the proof that the job supposedly was done correctly. If anything goes wrong, something is discovered down the road that was missed, or there's a huge mess left behind, say an electrician or a plumber comes in and says, yeah, what's all this stuff? This shouldn't be here. Then the homeowner can grab the contractor by the ear in that point and say, you said that this job was completed and completed properly and you signed off on it.